Have you ever seen a family try to hold the entire internet back with nothing but silence, loyalty, and one carefully worded statement? Because right now, that is exactly what people are saying may be happening around J. Prince Sr. and the storm surrounding J. Prince Jr.'s name in the Takeoff case. And let's be clear from the start, this video is strictly commentary based on the reports, reactions, and online conversations that have been exploding across social media. We are not saying these claims are proven facts. We are simply breaking down the drama that fans believe is getting deeper by the day. Because what started as whispers has now turned into a full-blown firestorm online. 1 minute, people were just revisiting old clips, old interviews, and old body language. The next minute, social media was flooded with fresh theories, heated reactions, and a growing belief that J. Prince Sr. may finally be reaching his breaking point as his son's name keeps getting pulled back into one of hip-hop's darkest and most painful stories. And if the reports and fan speculation are to be believed, emotions behind closed doors may be running hotter than ever. People are now asking one question over and over again. Is this just internet noise getting out of control, or is the pressure finally hitting the Prince family where it hurts most? Because when a father who has spent decades protecting his name, his legacy, and his family suddenly finds himself surrounded by accusations, whispers, and non-stop online scrutiny, things can turn personal very fast. And according to the latest chatter, that is exactly what may be happening. Fans are shocked, insiders are allegedly talking, and the internet has been dissecting every move, every old clip, and every tense moment like it is part of a much bigger story. Some are saying J. Prince Sr. is furious. Others believe he is hurt, frustrated, and exhausted from seeing his son's name trend for all the wrong reasons. But what really has people talking is the possibility that what is happening now could expose cracks inside a family that has always looked untouchable from the outside. Because if this pressure is really building behind the scenes, then what happened next may have pushed everything to the edge. The truth is, this whole thing did not explode because of one brand new headline. It exploded because people online started stitching together old pain, old footage, old interviews, and new legal chatter into one giant storm that now has J. Prince Sr.'s name and his son's name right in the middle of it again. And once the internet gets a story like that in its hands, it does not let go. It tears through every second of video, every facial expression, every silence, every old podcast clip, and every line somebody once said when emotions were running high. And that is exactly what has people saying the pressure on this family may be reaching a level nobody can ignore anymore. According to the wave of reports and social media commentary that started circulating again, the latest reason fans began talking was not because somebody came out and made one simple accusation. It was because the case itself, the names around it, and the people connected to that night all started becoming part of online discussion again at the exact same time. One update would trend, then an old interview would resurface, then a reaction clip would go viral, then suddenly everybody was talking like they had discovered a missing piece of a much bigger puzzle. And once J. Prince Jr.'s name started getting pulled into those conversations again, people began watching J. Prince Sr.'s every move like there was something written on his face that they had missed before. Fans started reposting clips of the Prince family speaking publicly in the aftermath of Takeoff's death, and what stood out this time was not just what was said, it was how it was said. The pauses felt heavier, the anger felt sharper. The grief sounded more raw than some people remembered, and because social media loves to turn pain into theory, those clips instantly became fuel for a new round of commentary. Some viewers said they saw a father trying to protect his son while carrying guilt he would never fully admit. Others said they saw a man trying to hold a narrative together while everything around him kept slipping out of his hands. Nobody could agree on what it meant, but everybody agreed on one thing. The energy around those clips felt different now. One blogger even said, "This ain't just about one tragic night anymore. This is about what happens when a family with a giant name can't outrun public suspicion." And that line spread fast because it hit exactly where people's curiosity already was. Because fair or not, the internet doesn't care how many years you have been respected, feared, or connected. The second people think there is a hidden layer to your story, they start digging like they are on a mission. And in this case, they were digging through
one of the most sensitive and painful stories in recent hip-hop memory. Inside the online conversation, one major thing kept coming up over and over again. People were not only discussing the tragedy itself, they were talking about optics, they were talking about appearances, they were talking about what things looked like, what things felt like, and what certain decisions seemed to suggest from the outside looking in. And as shallow as that may sound, optics are everything when the public is already suspicious. One old clip of somebody walking a certain way, one interview answer that sounds too calm, one sentence that lands too cold, and suddenly the internet starts treating body language like courtroom evidence. That is where the emotional pressure in this story really starts to build. Because if you are J. Prince Sr. and you are already dealing with a tragedy that the world refuses to stop attaching to your family's name, then every new wave of discussion becomes more than gossip. It becomes a threat to your legacy, your family image, and your son's reputation all at once. and people online are now convinced that behind the scenes, those conversations have not been calm at all. One source, quoted by a gossip page, claimed the atmosphere around the family has allegedly become tense anytime the topic comes up. Now again, we are treating that as unverified chatter, not fact. But according to that commentary, J. Prince Sr. is said to be deeply frustrated by the fact that every few months, the same story comes roaring back to life and drags his son into another cycle of blame. And if that is true, you can understand why emotions would be boiling over in private, even if nobody says it directly in public. Because this is not just about headlines. This is about a father hearing his son's name attached to one of the most heartbreaking stories in rap over and over again, while millions of strangers turn it into content, debate, and entertainment. And no matter how strong somebody looks in interviews, that kind of pressure can eat at a family from the inside. People close to celebrity culture know this pattern well. First there is a tragedy, then there is grief, then there is silence, then there are theories, then those theories become content, then that content becomes a public identity nobody asked for. And by the time the people at the center of it try to speak, the internet has already decided what role everybody is playing. Hero, villain, liar, protector, manipulator. Everybody gets assigned a label, whether it is fair or not. And according to fans, that is exactly what may have happened here. The family was left divided in the eyes of the public, not necessarily because of confirmed facts, but because of perception. Some fans still insist the Prince family has been unfairly blamed for being too close to a tragedy they did not create. Other people believe proximity always matters, and that being around the center of something this painful means you should be questioned forever. That divide has only gotten uglier with time. Every time one side speaks, the other side gets louder. Every time somebody defends the family, critics say it sounds rehearsed. Every time somebody attacks the family, supporters say it sounds heartless. There is no peace in that kind of cycle. And the more this online battle grew, the more J. Prince Sr.'s own old words started taking on a different life, especially the moments where he sounded deeply emotional and intensely angry at the same time. Fans began replaying one section of his past comments and asking whether they were hearing grief, rage, regret, or all three mixed together. Because there is a very specific kind of pain in watching a father defend his household, while also knowing the night in question will never stop haunting the people connected to it. You can hear it in him, one commenter wrote beneath a reposted clip. That man sounds like he'd been carrying this for years. Another shot back, or he sounds like somebody tired of getting blamed for something the internet already made its mind up about. And that is the war this whole story lives inside. One side hears heartbreak, the other hears damage control. One side sees a family under attack, the other sees a family under suspicion. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise is a real loss that keeps getting pulled back into public debate every time the case trends again. But what really pushed this latest wave of discussion into another gear was not just the old footage or the recycled theories. It was the way some commentators began claiming that what's happening now may be affecting the relationship between father and son behind closed doors. And once that angle hit social media, everything got even messier. Because suddenly the question was no longer just, why is J. Prince Jr.'s name being discussed again? The new question became, how is J. Prince Sr. handling the fact that his son keeps ending up in this conversation? And
that is where the emotional storytelling online really took off. Some fan pages started speculating that J. Prince Sr. may be furious, not only at the public, but at the situation itself. Not necessarily because he believes his son did anything criminal, but because he may feel like one night, one event, and one tragedy permanently changed how people look at his family. And if you think about it that way, the frustration makes more sense, because there is a difference between being accused of something and being trapped in the shadow of something forever. The second one can drive people just as crazy. One commentary channel even framed it like this: what if the real breakdown is not about guilt? What if it is about helplessness? What if this is a father realizing he cannot protect his son from a story that already swallowed the room years ago? That line hit people hard because it sounded believable on a human level. Forget the internet labels for a second. Forget the theories. Forget the hot takes. Imagine being in a family where one painful night keeps returning like a ghost every time you think the world has finally moved on. Imagine every time your name trends, it is connected to the same tragedy. Imagine every public appearance coming with side eyes, whispers, and comment sections full of strangers saying they know what really happened. Even if none of that is true, the emotional damage of living under it would still be heavy. And according to some of the more dramatic reports floating around, that weight may now be hitting harder than ever. There are now whispers that certain conversations behind the scenes allegedly became more heated once new legal talk and public speculation started colliding again. Nobody credible has publicly confirmed some explosive family confrontation, so let's keep that straight.
But the gossip world has been running wild with the idea that J. Prince Sr. may have had a deeply emotional reaction once it became clear that the case would not stop pulling his son's name back into the spotlight. And honestly, from a pure commentary standpoint, that is exactly the kind of family pressure cooker that sends fans into a frenzy. Because people are not just watching for legal developments anymore, they are watching for emotional fallout. They want to know who is frustrated, who feels betrayed, who feels exposed, and who may be privately breaking under the weight of it all. And if the latest wave of chatter is any indication, the public is no longer only asking what happened that night. They are now asking what this story may have done to the people still trying to live under its shadow. And that shadow, according to the way this story is being discussed online, may be darker inside the family than most people realize, because once fans started shifting the conversation from what happened that night to what has this done to the people connected to it ever since, the entire tone changed. It stopped feeling like a cold case breakdown and started sounding like emotional fallout from a wound that never really closed. And in celebrity culture, that is when a story becomes even more dangerous, not when the facts change, but when the feelings around them become the real headline. People began focusing on J. Prince Jr. in a very different way, not just as a name tied to old controversy, but as a son who may now be carrying a burden that gets heavier every single time the internet circles back. And once that angle took hold, fans started wondering whether J. Prince Sr.'s strongest emotion right now is not anger at the public, but pain over what this has allegedly done to his son's image, his peace, and his future. Because one thing about public suspicion is that it does not need a conviction to leave a stain. It only needs repetition. And this story has been repeated so many times that even people who barely know the details feel like they know the emotional shape of it. They know it as tragedy. They know it as tension. They know it as a family forever being asked the same question in different forms. And that is exactly why some of the latest online chatter has landed so hard. One entertainment page claimed that J. Prince Sr. has allegedly become more guarded than ever anytime this topic resurfaces. Again, that is commentary and gossip, not a verified insider report. But according to that narrative, the family is said to be exhausted by how every public move gets reinterpreted through the lens of one terrible night. A photo becomes suspicious, a silence becomes strategic, a statement becomes damage control, and if somebody looks too calm, people call it cold. If they look too emotional, people call it performance. There is no right way to survive public scrutiny once the internet has decided your name belongs inside a permanent cloud of doubt. And what makes this even more emotionally messy is the father-son angle, because a lot of people watching this unfold are not just seeing a powerful rap family.
Under fire, they are seeing a father who built his entire public identity around control, respect, and protection, now being forced to watch his son's name dragged through a conversation he may never be able to shut down. That is where the emotional hook of this whole story gets really heavy. One fan wrote, "You can tell this is bigger than public image now. This looks like family pain." Another responded, "Or maybe people are finally seeing how much pressure they've been under this whole time." That is what makes this topic so explosive. Almost everybody looking at it is projecting something human onto it. Some people project guilt. Some people project grief. Some people project frustration. But almost nobody looks at this story and sees emotional peace. That part seems gone, no matter which side somebody is on. And if reports and reactions are to be believed, the emotional center of this whole thing may have shifted from the outside world straight into the home. Because what happens when a father spends years publicly defending a situation, defending a family name, and defending a son, only to realize the public is not letting it go? What happens when the strategy that once looked strong starts feeling like it is no longer enough? That is when even the toughest people can start cracking in private. Some online commentators have even suggested that J. Prince Sr. may feel trapped between two impossible positions. On one side, he has to continue projecting strength, certainty, and loyalty, because that is who the public has always known him to be. On the other side, he may privately be dealing with the emotional reality that no amount of power, influence, or reputation can fully erase public suspicion once it hardens. And if that is really where his head is, then this may be less about anger and more about helplessness than people realize. Because think about it, if your son keeps getting attached to a case in headlines, blogs, and reaction videos years after the tragedy, you don't just feel attacked. Eventually, you start feeling haunted. Every new post becomes a reminder that the story is not over in the public's mind. Every new conversation says, "We still haven't let this go." And if you're a father watching that happen, you may stop seeing it as a media problem and start feeling it as a family wound. That is why so many people are now locked in on the emotional side of this story. They're not just asking, what is true? They're asking, what is this doing to them? And once that question opened up, people started looking harder at the old interviews between the Prince family and the media, especially the moments where tension seemed to flicker beneath the surface.
Fans are now revisiting the tone between sentences, the way people looked at each other while answering, the moments where one person spoke for the room and the other stayed quiet. Social media has basically turned itself into a giant body language lab, and as ridiculous as that can be, it's still shaping public opinion in a very real way. One clip that kept getting reposted featured the family speaking in a way that some fans described as controlled but heavy. And that description stuck because it captures the energy people keep reacting to. Not chaos, not obvious panic, just that very specific kind of emotional restraint that looks like it's hiding 10 times more than it is showing. And in internet culture, restrained emotion can sometimes trigger even more speculation than a full meltdown. Because when somebody screams, people say, okay, they lost control. But when somebody looks calm while carrying obvious pressure, people start asking what is really going on underneath. And that question may be the most dangerous one of all for this family right now. Then came the betrayal angle, because no high-drama celebrity story survives without somebody somewhere suggesting that private loyalty may be cracking behind the scenes. And sure enough, some gossip channels started hinting that not everybody around this story may still be on the same page emotionally. Not necessarily in a legal sense, not in a confirmed factual sense, but in a human sense. Meaning people connected to the situation may now be processing it differently, carrying it differently, and reacting to the endless public attention in ways that are no longer perfectly aligned. That kind of speculation sent fan pages into overdrive. Suddenly people were asking whether J. Prince Sr. may be frustrated not just with outsiders, but with how certain people around the situation have handled themselves over time. Again, that's not a confirmed claim, but it's the kind of theory that spreads fast because it taps into something audiences already believe about powerful families. They assume that behind every united public image, there are private fractures nobody sees until the pressure gets too intense to hide. And honestly, that's what makes this story feel so reality TV coded. Because
at its core, it is not just being consumed as a case anymore. It is being consumed as a family pressure story, a story about reputation, legacy, control, public image, private stress, and emotional loyalty under siege. That is why people cannot stop clicking, because even if they do not know every legal detail, they understand family tension. They understand what it looks like when one event changes how the whole world sees your last name. One blogger summed it up by saying, "This is what happens when a family that built itself on strength gets forced into a position where strength no longer fixes the optics." And that line hit like a truck because it points to the one thing nobody in this situation can seem to control: perception. The family may know their truth, supporters may know the side they believe, critics may believe something else entirely, but perception does not care. Once the public sees you through a certain lens, it starts filtering every move you make through that same lens. And in this case, that means every silence can be read as avoidance, every emotional statement can be read as strategy, and every act of protection can be read as proof of something darker. That is the impossible trap this family may now be living inside. And while all of that emotional pressure was already building, another wave of commentary started focusing on something even more painful: the idea that J. Prince Sr. may be carrying not only anger and frustration, but also a private sense of if only that night had gone differently, if only certain people had never been there, if only one small decision had changed the entire outcome. Because that is how trauma works. It doesn't just replay what happened, it replays all the alternate versions of what could have happened instead. Fans have noticed that some of the most emotional commentary surrounding this topic keeps circling back to that exact feeling. Not necessarily direct guilt, but the unbearable weight of proximity. The kind of pain that comes from being close enough to a tragedy that your mind keeps asking whether anything could have been done differently to stop it. And if that feeling is really sitting anywhere inside this family, then it would explain why every new wave of public speculation seems to hit with such force. Because when the internet is only talking about a story, you can ignore it. But when the internet keeps touching the exact nerve you are already privately carrying, that's when the noise starts feeling personal. And according to the latest reaction wave, that personal pressure may now be spilling into the way people interpret J. Prince Sr.'s entire emotional state. Not as a man calmly managing public controversy, but as somebody who may be deeply tired of fighting a story that refuses to die. But what truly took this from ongoing tension into possible emotional collapse territory was the way people began reacting to whispers that the latest developments may have triggered one especially difficult conversation behind closed doors. And once that rumor started moving, the public stopped seeing this as just another cycle of media drama. They started seeing it as the moment everything may have gotten too close to home.
And once that idea took hold, the entire tone of the conversation shifted from speculation to something that felt almost personal for the audience watching from the outside. Because now people were not just replaying clips or arguing in comment sections, they were imagining scenes. They were picturing what a private conversation inside that household might sound like when the cameras are off, when the phones are down, and when the reality of everything that has been said online finally hits the room. Some commentators began painting a picture of a moment where voices may have been raised, not in public, but in the kind of setting where emotions are no longer filtered. Again, there is no confirmed report of a specific confrontation, so this remains part of the ongoing online narrative. But the way people are talking about it, you would think they were sitting in the room themselves. That's how intense the speculation has become. One reaction channel described it like this: imagine being in that house when this topic comes up again. Imagine the silence before anybody speaks. Imagine the frustration that builds up because you know no matter what you say, the world is already locked into its own version of the story. That visual stuck with a lot of viewers because it felt real on a human level, not dramatic for the sake of clicks, but heavy in a way that anybody who has dealt with family pressure can understand. And that's what keeps pulling more people into this story. They are not just watching it as entertainment anymore, they are relating to it as emotion. Inside this growing narrative, Jay Prince Jr. has also become a central emotional figure, not just because his name keeps coming up, but because of how people
interpret his position in all of this. Some fans see him as someone caught in the middle of something that spiraled far beyond anyone's control. Others feel like he has never fully escaped the shadow of that night, no matter how much time passes. And then there are those who believe his silence at certain moments has only made the speculation louder. That split in perception has created a strange dynamic where every move he makes, or does not make, gets analyzed in completely different ways depending on who is watching. If he stays quiet, some say he is protecting himself. Others say he is avoiding something. If he appears calm, some call it strength. Others call it detachment. There is no neutral ground left in how the public views him, and that alone is enough to create serious emotional pressure behind the scenes. And when you bring a father like Jay Prince Sr. into that situation, someone whose entire image has been built on authority and protection, the emotional stakes get even higher. Because now it is not just about what the world thinks of his son, it's about what he feels he can or cannot do to shield him from that judgment. And if the public conversation has reached a point where nothing he says seems to change the narrative, that can create a level of frustration that is hard to hide forever. One fan wrote under a trending clip, "He built his whole life on controlling situations, but this is the one situation he can't control." And that line spread fast because it captures something deeper than gossip. It captures the idea of power meeting its limit. Not in business, not in influence, but in perception. Because you can have connections, you can have respect, you can have a legacy, but you cannot force millions of people to see a story the way you want them to see it once their minds are made up. That is where the emotional breaking point conversation started gaining traction, not because of one confirmed moment, but because of the pattern people think they are seeing. Every time the case trends again, the reactions seem sharper. Every time a clip resurfaces, the comments get more divided. Every time the family speaks, the internet responds louder. It feels like a cycle that keeps tightening, and according to many observers, cycles like that eventually lead to a moment where something gives. Some gossip pages even suggested that Jay Prince Sr. may have reached a point where he is no longer just responding to the public, but reacting to the situation itself in a more emotional way than before. Again, that's not confirmed, but it's the kind of narrative that spreads quickly because it feels like a natural progression of everything people have been watching. First comes control, then comes defense, then comes fatigue, and eventually something that looks like a breaking point. But what makes this even more complicated is how the audience itself is reacting. Because instead of calming down as time passes, the interest in this story seems to spike every time something small happens. A new legal update, a resurfaced interview, a single viral post, and suddenly the entire timeline is alive again with theories, debates, and strong opinions. It's like the story refuses to fade, and that refusal is exactly what keeps the emotional tension alive. You can see it in the comments. Some people are calling for answers. Others are calling for empathy. Some are defending the family with everything they have, while others are convinced there is more beneath the surface. And in the middle of all that noise, the human side of the story keeps getting pulled back into focus, whether people intend it or not.
One commenter said, "Everybody arguing like this is a TV show, but there are real people living this every day." And that statement cuts through the drama in a way that a lot of viewers do not expect, because it reminds you that behind all the theories and reactions, there are individuals dealing with a situation that has never fully gone away for them. And that's where the idea of emotional distance comes into play, because over time, people involved in long-running public stories sometimes try to create space between themselves and the narrative just to protect their peace. But according to the way this situation is unfolding, that distance may not be possible here. Every attempt to move forward gets interrupted by another wave of attention. Every effort to shift focus gets pulled back by another trending topic. It's like the story keeps reaching out and pulling them back into it, no matter how far they try to step away. That kind of environment can change how people communicate with each other behind closed doors. It can make conversations shorter, sharper, or more emotional than they would normally be. It can create moments where people who are usually aligned start seeing things differently, simply because they are dealing with the pressure in different ways. One person may want to speak out more. Another may want
to stay silent. One may want to confront the narrative. Another may want to ignore it completely. And when those approaches clash, that is where tension can quietly build. Fans have started speculating that this may be part of what is happening now. Not a dramatic falling out, not a confirmed argument, but a shift in how the situation is being handled internally. And even though that remains unverified, it adds another layer to a story that already feels heavy with emotion. Because if the public pressure is constant, and the internal responses to that pressure are not perfectly aligned, then the emotional load does not just stay outside, it starts moving through the family itself. And that is why so many people are now watching closely for any sign that something has changed. Not in official statements, not in legal updates, but in tone, in energy, in the way things are said, and the way they are not said. Because when a story reaches this level of intensity, even the smallest shift can feel like a major signal to an audience that is already on edge. One entertainment page summed it up by saying, "This ain't about one moment anymore. This is about how long you can carry something before it changes you." And that idea has become the core of the entire conversation. Not whether something new has been proven, but whether the weight of everything old has finally reached a point where it's starting to show in a way that cannot be hidden anymore. Because when people say J. Prince Sr. finally loses it, they are not necessarily talking about one dramatic scene caught on camera. They are talking about the possibility that behind all the controlled interviews, behind all the measured words, and behind all the public composure, there may be a level of emotional strain that has been building quietly for years. And if that is true, then what comes next may not be about what the public wants to hear. It may be about what the people inside that situation can no longer keep inside. And that is exactly why this story refuses to die. Because the more people watch it, the less it feels like a finished tragedy, and the more it feels like a wound that keeps reopening every time the world thinks it has found another clue, another angle, or another reason to drag the same names back into the spotlight. And if the online conversation is even halfway reflective of what the emotional reality feels like behind closed doors, then this is no longer just about public scrutiny. This is about emotional survival. By this point, the public has built entire narratives around what they think J. Prince Sr. is carrying. Some say he is carrying anger because his son's name keeps being attached to a tragedy that never should have followed the family this long. Others say he is carrying regret, not necessarily because of proven wrongdoing, but because of the unbearable reality that one night connected to his family's orbit changed how millions of people now see them forever. And then there are those who believe he is carrying something even heavier than both of those things: exhaustion. Because there is a very specific kind of exhaustion that comes from defending yourself against a story that has become larger than facts. Once a narrative becomes cultural, it stops needing updates to stay alive. It survives on emotion, memory, symbolism, and suspicion. And this story has all four. That is why people keep coming back to it. It is not just something they follow, it is something they feel. And in the middle of all that, J. Prince Jr. has become almost like a symbol in the public mind. Not just a person, but a representation of the question nobody can stop asking. How does someone live when one of the darkest moments in hip-hop keeps being attached to their name no matter how much time passes? Whether people sympathize with him or criticize him, that question still hangs over everything. And if a father is watching his son live under that kind of permanent spotlight, it makes sense that the emotional toll would be enormous.
Some of the latest online commentary has even framed this as a legacy crisis, not in the legal sense, but in the emotional and reputational sense. Because when a family has spent years being associated with power, structure, and influence, being trapped inside a story built on uncertainty can feel like the ultimate loss of control. And for somebody like J. Prince Sr., who has always seemed to understand the importance of image and narrative, that may be one of the hardest parts of all. One blogger said, "It is one thing to survive controversy. It is another thing to be permanently attached to grief you can never fully explain your way out of." And honestly, that line may explain why this topic keeps hitting so hard, because it captures the one thing that seems to sit underneath every reaction, every interview, every resurfaced clip, and every new wave of speculation. Nobody in this story appears emotionally free from it. Fans are shocked.
Not just because the case keeps coming up, but because the emotional energy around it still feels unresolved years later. Emotions ran high back then, and if the internet is reading the situation correctly, emotions may still be running high now. That is what keeps this from fading into old news. Unresolved pain has a way of staying alive, especially when the public keeps feeding it attention. And the family was left divided in the eyes of the audience long ago, even if nobody inside the family would ever describe it that way publicly. Because division is not always loud. Sometimes it is just different people carrying the same pain in different ways. One person becomes more defensive, another becomes quieter. One tries to move on, another cannot stop replaying what happened. And when a family is under public pressure while privately processing trauma, those emotional differences can start to feel like distance, even when the love is still there. That is why so many people believe the phrase "finally loses it" is resonating right now. Not because the world necessarily saw one confirmed meltdown, but because audiences recognize what emotional overload looks like when they see the signs of it. They recognize fatigue in somebody's voice. They recognize the strain in somebody trying to say the same thing for the 100th time. They recognize the heaviness in a family that knows one chapter of their story may never fully close, no matter how much time passes. And that may be the saddest part of all. Because while the internet keeps debating, theorizing, and replaying clips like this is a never-ending series, the people attached to the story are likely living with a much quieter reality, one where there are no dramatic sound effects, no edit cuts, and no comment section to hide behind. Just memory, pressure, grief, frustration, and the exhausting reality of knowing that the world may never stop connecting your family to something painful enough to reshape everything. Some fans believe the only thing that could ever truly calm this storm would be a moment of complete emotional honesty. Not a polished statement, not a carefully managed appearance, not another defensive explanation, but a raw moment where the people at the center of this story stop talking to the internet and start speaking from whatever truth they have actually been carrying all this time. Whether that moment will ever happen is another question entirely. Because public stories like this often trap the people inside them. The more they speak, the more they are analyzed. The less they speak, the more people assume. And once you are caught in that loop, there is almost no clean way out. Every move risks becoming another headline. Every silence risks becoming another theory. And that may be exactly why the emotional pressure feels like it keeps rising instead of settling. So when people say J. Prince Sr. is finally losing it after J. Prince Jr. keeps getting dragged into the Takeoff case, what they are really reacting to is not just one rumor or one headline. They are reacting to years of tension that now seem to be showing through the cracks. They are reacting to a family that, from the outside looking in, appears to still be living under the weight of one unforgettable night. And they are reacting to the possibility that no matter how much time passes, some stories do not end when the headlines stop. They end only when the emotions attached to them finally do. And right now, if the reports, reactions, and online speculation are any sign, those emotions still look very much alive. That is why people are still watching. That is why people are still asking questions. And that is why this story may still have one more emotional chapter left before the public ever feels like it has truly heard the last of it. And that is what makes this entire situation feel so heavy. Because no matter which side of the conversation people are on, one thing is clear. This story has never really left the culture. Every few months, it comes back louder, deeper, and more emotional than before. And each time it does, the same names end up back under the spotlight. If these reports and online reactions are any indication, the pressure surrounding J. Prince Sr. and J. Prince Jr. may be far from over. And fans are still trying to figure out whether what we are seeing is just public backlash, private pain, or something much bigger building behind the scenes. Again, this video is commentary based on the news reports, online discussions, resurfaced clips, and the speculation that has been taking over social media. We are not claiming any of these rumors or emotional interpretations are confirmed facts. We are simply breaking down the conversation that fans, bloggers, and commentators cannot seem to stop having. Because whether people believe this is all internet overreaction or a sign that serious emotional damage has been done behind closed doors, one thing nobody can deny is that the
public is still deeply invested in this story. And now I want to hear from you. Do you think J. Prince Sr. is simply tired of seeing his family dragged into this tragedy over and over again? Or do you think the resurfaced reactions, the pressure, and the ongoing speculation are exposing cracks that were always there but hidden from the public? And most importantly, do you believe this story is finally reaching its emotional breaking point? Or is the biggest twist still yet to come? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this conversation is far from over. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next explosive update. Because when stories like this start heating up, you already know we are going to break every angle down for you right here. Stay locked in, stay sharp, and I will see you in the next one.